Boldwood presents The Mersey Mistress, written by Sheila Riley and read by Julie Maisie. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Come to me in my dreams, and then by day I shall be well again. For then the night will surely pay the hopeless longing of the day. Matthew Arnold. Prologue. Wednesday the 24th of December, 1892. She's gone! Ruby Swift's frantic words echoed and bounced off the perpendicular walls, carried up the medieval stone aisle of the village church and rang through Lady Rowena Ashland's head like a clash of cymbals. Rowena pivoted towards the hysterical interruption and knew. She just knew. Every movable part of her body was rigid, petrified like granite, except for her wide, haunted eyes that gave a silent plea to Archie, who sat beside her on the hard wooden pew. His large, work-worn hand reached for hers, and Rowena said nothing, her mind scrabbling to comprehend. Turning her head, she saw Ruby Swift standing alone at the back of the Anglican house of worship, and a scream sliced through the fog in her head, galvanizing her to move. Archie's ground-eating strides took over her own, and the only sound was the click of her low-heeled shoes causing a reverberating echo in the stunned silence. "She's gone, Archie!" Mrs. Swift, Ashland Hall's housekeeper and her most valued confidant, had given up her own privacy for Rowena and Archie, wept as she told her nephew, "He came in, without warning, picked her up from her cradle and left. No explanation, nothing." "Who took her?" Archie's voice came as soft as his brown-eyed gaze, belying the bleached pallor of his handsome features. 6 feet 4 inches of muscle, he towered over Rowena's slim frame as secrets swirled round them like spirits of the dead looking in on sins of the living. "Reverend Harrington, he must have followed me from Ashland Hall and waited until you both left for church, unless he already knew where you lived," Ruby told him as the three made their way back to the sandstone cottage at the end of the narrow lane. It was Christmas Eve. Grey marbled clouds sprawled low across the snow-flecked meadows, fields and hedgerows, with the potential of more to follow, and it was the first time Rowena had left the cottage since her daughter's birth 10 days earlier. She and Archie had gone to the church to give thanks for their daughter's safe arrival and to arrange for Eleanor to be baptised the following Sunday. "Leave this to me," said Archie, as he headed to his horse and carriage standing outside the cottage, and Rowena made to follow him. But he turned towards her, held her in his arms and whispered, "You go inside. I won't be long." The first thing she saw when she entered was the empty cradle beside the fireplace, and she headed straight to it, lifting the delicate white shawl she had spent hours crocheting while waiting impatiently for the arrival of her and Archie's beloved daughter. "He warned me," she whispered, as if talking to herself. Holding the shawl to her lips, she inhaled the newborn fragrance of their most precious gift. "Who did?" Mrs. Swift asked, easing Rowena into the fireside chair. "Who warned you?" "My father," Rowena answered, as if in a daze. "He told me he would take the child and send it away. He had that power, you see. Not because he is one of the richest men in England. It is much simpler than that." Rowena looked up into Mrs. Swift's kindly features, and she said, "He can do as he pleases with me, as I am not yet 21. "No." Archie's aunt let out a gasp of surprise. "Does Archie know?" 18-year-old Rowena nodded. She had told him when she discovered she was carrying his child, not knowing if Archie, her father's head horseman, but much more to her than that, would stand by her or take off in the middle of the night to avoid her father's wrath. But she had no need to worry. Archie would never leave me in the lurch. "But you cannot marry without your father's consent." Mrs. Swift did not feel it was her place to pry, but now understood why the two had woken her in the middle of a hot summer night and begged refuge, and absolute secrecy, which she gave unreservedly. "He will never give me his blessing. You see, my father is a snob of the worst kind," Rowena said. "He dragged himself up by his bootstraps, granted, working and studying hard. He paid for his own education, even took elocution lessons to eliminate his working-class diction. Then he met my mother, the daughter of a shipbuilder, and the rest, as they say, is history." "Surely he will see you and Archie are as much in love as he must have been." "Yes, he would, if he had ever been in love with anyone or anything that was not attached to money and power," Rowena offered. "But you see, what my father had was ambition. He wanted to build the Ashland Empire, and he did, when my mother received her inheritance. That way he could afford to bury his past under accolades and triumphs." "I don't understand," Mrs. Swift replied, removing her coat and taking Rowena's, ready to put upstairs before making a pot of fresh tea. "My father does not want to be reminded of where he came from, a child from the Liverpool slums, not fit to lick the boots of a man like Archie." Rowena removed her hat and handed it to Mrs. Swift. "The only person who knows where I am is my sister, May. I wrote and told her about my baby girl. I was not aware she had lost the child she was carrying." "You mean to tell me that Reverend Harrington has kidnapped your daughter?" Mrs. Swift's face was devoid of all colour. "Not kidnapped, no," Rowena told her. "May lost her baby and was told by a renowned Harley Street gynecologist that she would never carry another, after complications almost robbed her of her own life. Giles Harrington, her husband, suggested they take Eleanor and raise her as their own to prevent any kind of scandal." "Oh, you are such a poor, poor girl," said Mrs. Swift. "That is no decision for a new mother to make." "It is not a decision I would ever make, and I told Giles Harrington so when he wrote to me with his ridiculous recommendation." Rowena clung to the precious shawl as if her life depended upon it. "According to Giles, Father said I had two choices. The first was to give up my daughter and allow him and my sister to bring her up as their own." "And the second choice?" Mrs. Swift asked, hardly wanting to find out, knowing how ruthless and ambitious Silas Ashland could also be when he had a mind. "The second choice was for my daughter to go into St. Simeon's Home for Unwanted and Orphaned Children, from where she would be sent abroad, once old enough, and reared in another country, unaware of who her family were." "So you agreed to let May bring her up?" "I agreed no such thing," said Rowena. "Archie and I are moving to Liverpool. I have some money and jewellery I managed to collect when I left Ashland Hall. Archie has his savings. We will manage." When Archie arrived back a few hours later, his face was ashen with anger and helplessness. "I can't fight your father," he told Rowena. Archie took hold of Rowena's trembling shoulders. "He holds all the cards, my darling. You are under the age of consent, and he could have you committed into an asylum. He has that power." "I smell a conspiracy." Rowena felt her insides churn. "May would never think of such a thing alone. She does not have the gumption." "No, I see Giles Harrington's hand in this. With no heir to speak of, how on earth will he convince Father to leave everything to May?" "Your father said if you marry me while he is alive, he will disinherit you too." "Let him!" Rowena lifted her chin, feeling a steeliness stiffen her backbone. "I will marry you one day, Archie, but not while he is alive. I will not give him the satisfaction of respectability. He will lie in his cold, lonely bed at night and know his daughter is living in sin." Chapter 1. Christmas Eve, 1910. Dressed warmly against the raw morning chill, Ruby Swift caught the woman's quick bird-like movements from the corner of her eye and recognising her instantly, she placed the delicate lace shawl into her bag. Pursing her generous lips, she sighed deeply. A few moments more, that's all she had wanted. "Mrs. Woods, why are you skulking outside my door at this early hour?" Ruby's tone was sharper than she intended as she watched Izzy Woods grip the thin grey wrap around scrawny shoulders, and she surmised the garment offered little protection against the biting wind coming in off the River Mersey. "Good morning, Mrs. Swift." Izzy's small eyes streamed, and she wiped away wind tears with her threadbare sleeve, sniffing loudly as Ruby emerged from the shelter of the overhead railway to cross the cobbled Regent Road. "I just come from morning mass and wanted to see if Uncle was opening earlier today, it being Christmas Eve and all." Everybody round the proud but downtrodden parish of St. Patrick the Apostle called her beloved Archie Uncle, because he owned one of the most important establishments in the north end of Liverpool, the pawn shop. "You are too early, Izzy." Ruby stood stiffly, breathing in the inescapable smell of lumber from the timber yards at Canada Dock, mingling with acrid smoke from household chimneys, nearby warehouses and factories. "Christmas Eve or not, Archie will not open the shop before he has eaten breakfast. He has a busy day ahead of him, as do all of us." Ruby's schoolmarm tone rose above the foghorn bellowing off the river, and she regretted her impatience. The much-needed pawnshop was the first business Ruby, once known as Rowena, and Archie opened when they moved into the district 20 years ago. The answer to many a poor housewife's prayer in this close working-class community of Liverpool, its teeming back-to-back houses and courts housing the descendants of Irish Catholic families who came to Liverpool after fleeing the 1847 potato famine and set up home near to their workplace at the dockside. A fleeting memory of yesteryear softened the rigid line of Ruby's shoulders, and her stiff demeanour relaxed, lessening the air of authority her standing in the community afforded her. Poor Izzy looked perished in her faded shawl, and Ruby felt acutely self-conscious of the difference between them. Her thick woolen coat, with its grey pelt collar, matching the fur Cossack-style hat amply covering her dark curls, was a substantial barrier to the winter weather, keeping the cold squall at bay, unlike Izzy's. No doubt the woman crouching in the corner of the hock shop doorway, hugging a couple of cheap pottery dogs, would go back to a cold, overcrowded tenement, her cupboards bare, and little hope of filling them without a visit to Uncle for a loan. Izzy would offer her prized but worthless ornaments as surety of payment, and Ruby knew they had been in the pawnshop almost as often as Archie. The mother of a growing brood, Izzy's indolent husband had energy for only two things: the first, to go forth and multiply, and the second being the drink. Izzy was a prime example of why Ruby's beloved suffragist society was calling for women's emancipation. Women should lead the life they desired, and not that dealt to them by an overbearing spouse. One day, Ruby strongly suspected, wives and daughters would be their own person, not the chattels of the men who purported to love them. Izzy deserved better. "Archie will open up as soon as he has eaten breakfast," she repeated. Ruby's words were softer now, almost apologetic in tone, as the dock road bustled into life. Even at this early hour, horses' hooves clip-clopped along the icy cobbles, their wagons groaning under the weight of the world's produce, and Ruby noticed Izzy shrink further back in the doorway when she heard a passing policeman bid good morning to the barber, butcher or greengrocer already trading. "I was hoping to get to Paddy's market before it gets really busy," Izzy said, over the noise of rumbling handcarts and wagons that worked this main road to and from the docks all day, every day. Ruby nodded, her eyes narrowing as she listened, trying not to judge. The local market would be heaving with hard-pushed women on the lookout for a bargain to brighten their Christmas table and bring a bit of joy even at this early hour when traders were still building their stalls. "You know what it's like when you've got little uns," Izzy said, and she quickly slapped her hand across her open mouth and was silent for a moment, her words tripping over each other when they finally came. "Well, you don't know what it's like to have little uns. Obviously, I was only saying. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant, Izzy." Ruby's understanding tone assured the other woman her tactless comment had not given offence. She and Archie could not raise a child in a place like this. Not that she'd had a choice in the matter. Her father and the cleric saw to that. Unlucky enough not to raise a child of her own, she knew the locals would give their eye teeth to know the full story. To the prolific breeders of the Dock Road, her private life beyond the counter of the Emporium was meat and gravy to the likes of Izzy Woods. Minding other people's business gave little time to worry about her own troubles. But Ruby knew this woman, old before her time like so many, had a lot on her plate, and it had nothing to do with food. "I suppose you'll be run off your feet in the Emporium today." Izzy's voice carried an almost imperceptible shiver, and Ruby doubted the poor woman would ever step foot over the double-door threshold of the Emporium. Her own business, larger than the pawn shop, was Ruby's pride and joy. The expanding commerce did much the same for her middle-class clients as the pawn shop did for Izzy, and Ruby knew if Archie's establishment was the poor woman's saviour, then Ruby's Emporium was the haunt of so-called better classes feeling the pinch, under the guise of shopping for glittering crystal or refined porcelain tableware, some of which had been brought from all corners of the world by hard-up mariners looking for a quick sale. "I wanted to get to the market early before Mr. Woods rises from his pit," Izzy repeated, while Ruby surmised, not without a stab of pity, he would sink Izzy's borrowed money into every alehouse along the Dock Road given the chance. Having lived and worked on the port side since she was 18 years old, Ruby had spent the last 20 years getting to know every one of its inhabitants. But none of them knew the real her. The only people who knew were Archie and Anna Cassidy, her loyal assistant who worked on the accounts of middle-class debtors in the Emporium's back office, a discreet cover for well-dressed businessmen who lived beyond their means. Ruby's upper-class clients were selected only on recommendation. After the initial interview, Ruby offered the support that would save their good name, their business, or their marriage. With interest, of course. A shrewd businesswoman, Ruby jumped at the opportunity to grow her business when a well-dressed young man had inquired if she offered loans. "Only on quality goods," she quipped. The next day he had brought in a breathtaking Capodimonte vase, pledging it against a loan. She did not hesitate. She gave the Capodimonte vase pride of place in the window, so young Buck could see it every day from the carriage window as he made his way to the office. His repayment was never late, and Ruby could only imagine his beloved wife's gasp of delight when he presented it to her straight from the mender's, along with another fine piece on the day he paid off the advance of his loan. And so began one of the most discreet and lucrative loan companies operating, under the guise of quality goods being sold at knockdown prices. Business boomed. The overhead train approaching from Seaforth Sands ran towards Dingle in the south of Liverpool, giving passengers a clear sighting of the bustling docks on one side, and on the other, a bird's-eye view of the large double windows of her store, showing a fabulous array of expensive, cut-priced fancy goods, which claimed the avaricious regard of young ladder-climbers who would rest their gaze on a previously selected piece which could be bought on the never-never. Paying off a little each week on a set of finest crystal goblets or the best china money could buy, the young office manager out for promotion would not be ashamed to invite the boss and his good lady wife to dine, even though he had insufficient wherewithal to do so. Discretion was Ruby's valuable stock in trade. For the last 18 years, she had put the vase back in the window many times. Sometimes, late payments inevitably meant the inability to pay the debt, and one of the more discerning, well-heeled members of the community would give pride of place to an exquisite piece of porcelain in her own windows by purchasing it, something poor Izzy would never be able to afford to do. Ruby noticed the lingering look of hunger on Izzy's face as a fishmonger trundled his handcart through the damp air to set up his stall, while drovers moved cattle from docked ships to slaughterhouse, to butcher shops and market stalls on this busiest day of the year. When the day dawned fully, the road would be alive with dockers, riggers, shipwrights and scalers, carters, draymen and trams. The local bobbies would pound their beat, immigrants would wander in a daze, looking for a cheap boarding house, and whores would hang off sailors' burly arms as they zigzagged their way from one alehouse to another, while hard-pressed housewives, like Izzy, did their best to make ends meet, and hummed carols while the Salvation Army shook their tambourine, inviting one and all to rest ye merry gentlemen. "You'll catch your death, hanging round here in this weather," Ruby said, as the pewter clouds, pregnant with the promise of snow, opened to release the first floating white flakes of the season. "I might as well stay, now I'm here." Izzy sounded deflated, her eyes dull, watching all walks of life concentrate the 7-mile spine of the dock road and pass her by. Another foghorn sounded on the river as the morning haze cloaked the Mersey, and Ruby saw Izzy shiver uncontrollably. The woolen shawl she wore incapable of keeping out a draught, let alone the swirling blizzard to come, and she had a flush of Christmas spirit. Opening the flap of her tooled leather bag that held the whisper-soft shawl Ruby had fashioned with a crochet hook all those years ago, she drew out a crisp 10-shilling note and, looking right, then left, she slipped the money into Izzy's cold, work-worn hand. "Take this," Ruby said, ignoring the gasp and startled look in Izzy's dark eyes. "Tell nobody, you hear me? I don't want people to think I've gone lax." "Oh, Miss Ruby!" Ruby watched the worry fade from Izzy's eyes, to be replaced with a tenderness that smoothed her prematurely lined face, and Ruby's back stiffened. She was not known as a soft touch round here, but she knew what it was like to go without. By God, she did. "I don't know how to thank you." Izzy clutched the money tight to her shrunken bosom, and Ruby had a notion that nobody in their right mind would try to relieve her of the note if they valued their eyes. "Keep that lad of yours under control. That's all I ask," Ruby said, knowing Jerky Woods was a tearaway who would turn feral if he wasn't taken in hand. "I saw him levering the cover off a grid round Queen Street last night." A cloud crossed Izzy's face, and Ruby knew the lad was a wrong-un, but who could wonder when he had such a lazy article of a father? "I can't do a thing with him." Izzy wrung her hands, careful not to drop the money. The bunched skin round her eyes returned, her expression pained. "He doesn't listen to a word I say. The only thing he understands is about round the ear-hole from his father." "The boy needs encouragement, not a whipping, a steady hand." Young Woods had no such person. No hard-working guardian he could emulate. Like Ned, who looked up to Archie. Ruby felt heart-sorry for the woman who had reached a dead end with her eldest son. "We'll say no more on the matter," Ruby sighed, not wanting to take the good out of the money by bemoaning a woman already beaten. "I hope you have a good Christmas, Izzy." "The same to you, Mrs. Swift. God bless you." "If we all had God's blessing." Ruby threw the words over her shoulder as she headed to the discreet side door that ensured the customers of the pawn shop never met the clients of the Emporium, and which led to the huge expanse of living quarters above. "I doubt you would stand here waiting for the pawn shop to open, and I would be out of business." Pushing the key into the shiny brass lock, she saw Izzy hurry in the direction of Paddy's Market, eager to find a bit of Christmas cheer for her brood. Once inside, Ruby did not take the stairs to the upper living quarters. Instead, she opened the door to the office at the back of the Emporium, went in and closed the door softly behind her as she walked through to the store. Taking the cloud of ivory lace from her bag, She held the delicate shawl to her face, inhaling deeply, imagining she could still capture that elusive fragrance, whilst thrusting the memory of that other terrible Christmas Eve to the back of her mind. She placed the shawl on the glass shelf with reverential calm, smoothing down the fine edging, arranging the scalloped hem so it sat exactly right in the glass cabinet beside the till, something she had done every year since she opened the business. There had been many inquiries about the shawl, but Ruby would never dream of parting with it, telling the customers they could have the clothes off her back, but the shawl was not for sale. Entering the dining room in the spacious flat spread over two businesses below, the Emporium and the pawn shop, Ruby could see Archie was already seated, reading the morning newspaper whilst waiting for her to join him. A restrained Yorkshireman, Archie was disinclined to show his loving feelings in front of the staff, but Ruby knew her soft-hearted other half loved her as much today as he did all those years ago when her father took him on as his stable manager. Not that her father, the great Silas Ashland, would allow such a match, but his opinion was of no consequence any more. "Good walk?" Archie asked as Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, brought in a tray laden with breakfast accoutrements, and Ruby nodded, swallowing hard, not yet able to speak, as she sat down. Every Christmas Eve, she walked alone to the Pier Ed. She looked across the river to the place where her father had built his shipping empire, and every year she took out the shawl, holding it close to her heart, vowing that one day she would take the garment, the symbol of all she held dear, to her father, and she would show him all she had achieved without his help. Archie silently reached for her hand, in that unspoken, understanding way they both had, and Ruby was contented. That small gesture told her all she wanted to know. They still had, and always would have, that unshakable, impermeable bond. "There is a mist on the river this morning," Ruby said, as unshed tears collected at the rim of her eyes, and she blinked them away. "So there wasn't much to see." "I'm glad," Archie said, smiling to Mrs. Hughes as she was about to leave the room. When the door clicked shut, he got up, went over to Ruby's chair, and kissed her, long and deep. "I'm so sorry we were not there that day. Things would have been so different if I had." "It wasn't your fault, Archie," Ruby answered, knowing the subject came up every Christmas Eve, and was as painful today as it had been all those years ago. "The blame lies at the door of my sister and that hard-faced cleric she married." Pushing away her plate, unable to eat the breakfast feast Mrs. Hughes had prepared, Ruby was certain she could not swallow a morsel. "It's going to be a long day. You have to eat something," Archie said. "This is our busiest day of the year." His troubled gaze never left her face, and Ruby gave him a reassuring smile. "I am more robust than you give me credit for, Archie," Ruby said, a signal to close the subject of their past and calm him. Their day would continue as it always did, busy and productive. "Has Emma not arrived yet?" She decided she would try a piece of toast when Archie shook his head. "That's unusual. She is never late." Chapter 2. "Oh, ma'am!" 16-year-old Anna Cassidy cried as she rose from the table, leaving her two young brothers to finish their breakfast of porridge oats. "What happened?" Anna hurried across the cosy room to the door where her mother, Emma, was limping badly, and helped her to a stout brown leather chair near the fireside in the front room. "I was on my way to the Emporium," Emma told her daughter. "I hadn't gone far, picking my way along the road as the gas lamp was out again. I didn't see the cover had been dislodged from the grid." Emma winced in pain as Anna lowered her into the chair. "I tripped over the iron cover, giving my ankle a nasty twist." Surveying the damage in the firelight, Emma said, "I doubt I'll be able to get to the Emporium today." A voice full of trepidation, she added, "Today is payday, and there is still shopping left to do for Christmas." "Don't you worry about that now, ma'am," Anna said, dragging the three-legged stool across the rag rug in front of the fire. We'll sort something out. You rest your leg on this. She looked at her mother's ankle, which was already swollen to twice the normal size. It's going to be black and blue, ma'am. You may have broken a bone. Generous as the Swifts were with her mother's pay, in recognition of the responsible position she held, Anna knew this day's wages were needed if they were to have any kind of Christmas joy tomorrow. I'll take you to the Northern Hospital and let them have a look at it. Great Howard Street is not far, I know, but I doubt I could walk even that short distance, Emma said, as daylight streamed through the window and brought her curious young sons from the breakfast table and into the front room of the terraced house that came with their mother's job. Just get me a cold cloth and I'll rest my leg. It might do the trick to lessen the swelling, said Anna, wanting to take the worry from the eyes of her young brothers, copper-haired James and dark-haired Michael, 5-year-old twins who looked nothing like each other. Hurrying to the scullery, she soaked a cloth under the cold copper tap before lighting the gas stove and making her mother a hot cup of tea, adding a little sugar for the shock. Anna went back to the front room, where her 2 brothers were huddled at their mother's feet in front of the blazing fire. I'm sorry to put you to all this trouble, Anna, love, Emma said, when Anna gently wrapped the cold cloth round her swollen ankle. You've got enough to do looking after the twins without having to see to me as well. Allowing a gentle sigh to escape her lips, she quickly glanced towards the arched wooden clock on the high mantelpiece. I've never been late in all the years I have worked for Ruby. Mrs. Swift will know something is wrong, Anna said, knowing proud principles had stood her mother in good stead with Ruby Swift. Her mother's complexion had turned quite pale, and unshed tears glistened in her eyes. It's not your fault, ma'am. Anna's voice was soothing. I'll go along and tell the missus what's happened. Christmas Eve is ever so busy, Emma said, as a worried frown creased her forehead. I can't let Ruby down today. Don't give it another thought, ma'am. I will take over your work if the missus will allow it. Anna knew Ruby was a canny, book-smart businesswoman, but so was she, a competent assistant at the twins' school, training to become a school teacher after being told she had the capability and proficiency. Her work ethic, inherited from her hard-working mother, who had gone out to earn a living for as long as she could remember. Mam had been working for Ruby Swift since Anna was a child on her hip. In the days when her father was away at sea, money was scarce, and nothing changed when he was killed after his ship sank. I will take over your duties today. Please don't worry. I knew that clever brain of yours would come in handy. Emma gave a feeble smile and winced when Anna gently slid a cushion under her leg to make her more comfortable. Most certainly, Anna said, knowing she had been fortunate to pass the matriculation examination to enable her to go to a good school, as had Sam, her 12-year-old brother, and having finished her learning, Anna had been lucky enough to secure a position in the infant school her twin brothers attended. I'll call Sam, Anna added, knowing her brother found getting out of a warm bed on a cold morning a bit of an unnecessary test of his obliging nature. He'll want to help in a situation like this. I should have been more careful where I put my feet, Emma told her daughter, who was putting a bowl of porridge on the table for Sam after calling him from his bed. The street lamp was out, and I couldn't see the obstacle. It is not your fault, ma'am. I saw tearaways dislodging the cover. Drink your tea while it is hot. Anna had seen Jerky Woods and his cohorts interfering with the grid only the previous evening. You're a good girl, Anna, Emma said, picking up her cup from the saucer. I don't know what I'd do without you and Sam. You are both clever, and I do not want either of you going into service or serving behind a shop counter. I've got high hopes for both of you. Anna knew her mother had done her best for her 4 children, making sure they were respectable and all well-dressed and perfectly groomed, even if their clothes were bought second-hand from Ruby's Emporium. I'll go and let the missus know what's happened, ma'am, Anna said, fastening her black buttoned boots. I've to get the business takings into the bank before it closes, Emma said, watching her daughter fasten the buttons on her good-quality jacket before pulling on a matching sage-green tam o' shanter hat and marvelling at how efficient Anna was. Ruby won't want huge sums of money hanging round all over the place at Christmas. Anna looked to her young brothers before saying to her mother in a low whisper, "Don't fret, Mum. I know you've been squirreling presents away for the boys, but I'll call into the market for the stock and treats after taking the money to the bank." "I wish you didn't have to go. You've enough to do." Emma nodded to her 5-year-old twin boys, their thick shock of hair so like their older brothers, who were happily playing on the rag rug in front of the fire, oblivious to the complications unfolding round them. "We all muck in together, Ma'am. That's our way," Anna reassured her mother, who winced in pain when she moved her foot. "I know you'd never ask anybody to do something you could do yourself." "I'm lucky to have 4 wonderful children." Emma's marine-coloured eyes softened, and Anna, so like her mother, smiled. "We may only have one parent, but we've never missed out on anything, especially love and care. Be off with you." Her mother's cheeks grew pink, and she dismissed Anna's sentimental observations with a wave of her hand. Then she offered her daughter a pensive smile. Anna shared the same feelings when her mother's voice thickened with emotion. "I wish things could be different, don't you?" "Pa would be so proud of you," Anna said, knowing her mam missed her seafaring husband as much today as she did when they lost him 5 years ago, just before the twins were born. Then Anna said briskly, "I'll tell the landlord about that broken gas light on the way to Ruby's. It should have been fixed ages ago." "You're a good girl, Anna." With trembling hands, her mother sipped the hot tea. "I do so hate to be a burden." "You are not a burden, Ma'am." Anna gave her mother a reassuring smile. "The turkey has been ordered. I'll call into the butcher after I've taken the money to the bank," Anna cut in. If she did not get a move on, she would never be able to catch up on all her chores. "Please be careful carrying all that money, especially today. I can look after myself if need be, Ma'am." Anna tried to ease her mother's worry. "Christmas brings out the best in most people and brings out the worst in some. But don't worry, our Sam will help me." She nodded to her 12-year-old brother at her side, her greatest ally. "He can pop into the doctor and ask him to come and have a look at your leg while I go and see the missus." Anna wished she could take away her mother's evident pain. "Indeed you will not." Emma's eyes widened. "We will not be wasting good money on doctors. If you feel so strongly that I might need something, call into the apothecary. He'll give you a bottle of embrocation." Looking at the obvious swelling, Anna was not sure rubbing liquid would be enough to ease her mother's pain. However, she would not go against her wishes. "I'll call into the fried fish shop on the way back." Anna saw her brother's expressions brighten at the rare treat. "Oh, yes," Emma agreed. "We'll have a nice bit of cod and some of those fried potatoes you young ones like so much." Anna knew her mother never wasted money on what she called lazy food, preferring instead to use hard-earned money on fresh ingredients. A wonderful cook, her mother made delicious meals from almost nothing and had taught her to do the same. "You rest your leg, Ma, and boys." The twins looked up from their game of wooden dolly-peg soldiers, whose battles were played out on the rag rug in front of the fire. "Would you like to make paper chains and lanterns to decorate the ceiling?" The twins gave a whoop of delight, nodding vigorously. "I'll bring some coloured paper from the market, but you must look after Mama. Be good and don't make a noise." Again they nodded, assuring Anna they would be on their best behaviour. "I better get a move on," Anna said. "I'll be back as quick as I can." Ruby lifted her head to see Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, hovering near the door. "I am sorry to disturb your breakfast, Mrs. Swift." Mrs. Hughes' stiff tone told Ruby she had been inconvenienced, "and I did tell her you were eating, but she says it's urgent." "Who is it, Mrs. Hughes?" Ruby asked, and when the housekeeper said it was Anna Cassidy, she nodded. "Show her in." Ruby didn't mind eating breakfast in front of the daughter of her long-time employee, but her smile faded when 16-year-old Anna sidled apologetically into the room. "I am so sorry to interrupt your breakfast, madam." Anna had never been privy to Ruby's living arrangements, and she felt uncomfortable, out of place, in the quiet opulence of brilliant white plasterwork framing the pale blue walls. How does anybody keep the woodwork so white in this mucky area, she thought, before realising she had not told Ruby why she was here. The thing is, Ma had a bad fall. Her ankle is very swollen. Oh dear. That is bad news, especially today. Ruby stopped eating, her mind working fast. There were several important accounts that needed Emma's attention today, which Ruby could not attend to, as the Emporium would be so busy. I can take over her duties in the office, if you wish, madam. Ruby's pause spurred Anna on, so you won't be inconvenienced. Her efficient manner told Ruby she was a confident, articulate girl who would be extremely helpful. I know Emma would not leave me in the lurch, especially on Christmas Eve. Nor forgo a day's wages. Anna kept that last bit of information to herself, as she tried to keep her eyes from straying to the delicious food, reminding her she had not yet eaten. Instead, she concentrated on the luxurious pale damask curtains draped at the bay windows, a backdrop to the 7-foot spruce that filled the air with its exquisite pine perfume. Who could imagine such grandeur only yards from the bustling Mersey docks? Won't you sit down and have something to eat? A cup of tea? Ruby asked, and Anna shook her head. I'm sorry to hear poor Emma is injured. Obviously, the family would be dependent on her wages, but they were a proud family, never asking anybody for handouts, unlike some of their so-called betters. But she would ask anyway. Is there anything we can do? She glanced across the table to Archie, who nodded. No, thank you, madam. I have everything in hand. Anna knew Ruby liked to be thought of as a tough businesswoman, but she was devoted to those who were loyal to her. Anna's heart beat a little faster. Ruby knew that the family needed every penny, and to lose a day's pay would be a big disappointment to Emma on Christmas Eve. Her shapely eyebrows knitted together, and she was thoughtful for a moment. The office accounts would have to wait until after Christmas. Without a doubt, the girl was intelligent enough to take on the accounts. Emma had worked hard to make sure her daughter received a good education. Nevertheless, discretion was the key to her success. Ruby knew she must abide by her promise of confidentiality to her clients. However, she knew Anna could be trusted to collect the rents. The outstanding rents must be collected, otherwise the tenants will think they've been given a Christmas bonus they could only dream of. Ruby poured more tea into her cup. Do you think you could manage that? Anna nodded. She would do anything if it meant securing the day's wage for her mother. It might be Christmas Eve, but it is also Saturday. Ned and Archie never miss the football match and won't be able to collect rents this afternoon. In the 4 years the 17-year-old had shared their home, Ned had brought much laughter and fun and was a steadfast supporter of Liverpool Football Club, while Archie was a dedicated disciple of the team across Stanley Park at Everton. Each week they went to the home game on match days, regardless of which team they supported, unable to travel to away games because of working in the pawn shop. Our Sam will help me with collections, Anna proclaimed with a smile, relieved she would be able to take the day's wages home to her mother. He will be my bodyguard. In that case, here are the morning's collections. Ruby gave Anna a leather bag containing a notebook of addresses, and she secured the long strap across her body so it could not be snatched by any hoodlums on the make for Christmas. Ruby and Archie had many business interests, Anna knew, proof of what hard work and long hours could achieve, knowing when they came to the dockside they had nothing. You are quite sure you don't mind taking over until your mother is better? Anna shook her head, knowing since her father died, her ma had not had it easy. She was the head of the family. Sam earned a few coppers here and there, usually carrying bags and boxes for a copper or two, while Anna earned a pittance working at the school. And although Ma earned enough to keep her family fed and warm, there wasn't much left over for luxuries. However, their seemingly comfortable lifestyle brought out the green-eyed monster in some of the inhabitants of Queen Street, especially their next-door neighbour. "I will do whatever is needed of me," Anna said as the door opened, and Ned Kincaid came into the room and nodded a greeting. The orphan son of a gypsy fistfighter, Ned was taken under the wing of Ruby and Archie when his pa died in tragic circumstances. Ruby caught the flash of surprise in Ned's blue eyes, aware of the creeping flush spreading across his strong neck. That meant only one thing, she thought, and Anna was the only person who had that effect on him. "Hello, Ned," Anna said brightly, but he just gave a fleeting smile, unusually quiet, and Anna wondered if, since he moved from the tenements where they had been neighbours and she had moved to Queen Street, they'd naturally drifted apart from the childhood friends they had always been. "When you've collected each rent, enter it into the book," Ruby said, filling in the silence. "Don't forget to sign your name." "Yes, ma'am." She'd seen her mother do that when she had accompanied her years ago. "Take no hard luck stories," Ruby ordered. "There will be some who will try to wriggle out of paying. Oh, and don't take a drink off anybody." "A drink?" Anna asked, her eyebrows pleating in confusion. "What kind of drink?" "Alcoholic," Ruby told her. "Some will engage you in conversation, ply you with eggnog or spiced rum, and before you know it, you have wished them all the best and left without collecting the money." She tapped her nose with her forefinger. "You've got to get up incredibly early to get one over on Ruby Swift, so be warned." "I consider myself warned," Anna smiled, confident in her own worth when she caught the glimmer of a smile on Ruby's lips. "Your mother usually does the accounts after collections, but as it is Christmas Eve, we shall leave the accountancy work until we reopen." Ruby liked the girl, who some would say had her head screwed on the right way. Anna's feisty nature reminded her of the girl she once was. "Ned would usually accompany your mother to collect the rents, but the pawn shop is at its busiest on Christmas Eve. And we can't forget the football match." Anna gave a wry smile, knowing most men would go without a meal before they would miss the precious 3 o'clock kick-off. "I know every nook and cranny of the dockside. What is there to worry about?" Chapter 3. After collecting the morning's rents, Anna went to the apothecary for a bottle of embrocation for her mother and then to the fish and chip shop before hurrying home. She told her ma she was going to take over her duties until her leg was better, which was a blessed relief. This afternoon she would go into the town centre to collect the business rents. Then after picking up ma's wages, she would go to the market on the way home and buy the fruit, veg and meat for tomorrow. Ma had also reminded her to pick up treats for the twins to open in the morning. Knowing they would have money coming in put her mother's mind at rest, and Anna liked being useful. They were in no position to lose a full day's wages, especially at Christmas time. "Sam, do you think you could give me a hand to collect the rents this afternoon?" Anna asked before draining her teacup and collecting the empty plates from the table. "Aye." 12-year-old Sam, more mature than his years, being the oldest male in the house, felt it was his duty to escort his sister. "I've got to go into town as well." He gave a secretive smile, and Anna knew he had been saving hard for a Christmas present for Ma, and he had been looking forward to picking it up today. "I will meet you at the Gaudy Piazza later," Sam said as he went out of the door. Anna removed the burgundy chenille tablecloth and spread last night's evening Mercury on the bare wooden table, so that James and Michael would be gamefully distracted making the Christmas decorations while Ma rested. She had bought brightly coloured paper with a few coppers her ma gave her that morning and cut the paper into strips and squares to make paper chains and lanterns that would festoon the ceiling in celebration of Christmas Day. Anna was beginning to realise just how hard her mother worked every day to keep their home warm and cosy and their bellies full. Feeling grown up and dependable, she knew her mother had no need to worry. She was going to do all the things that Ma usually did to make Christmas Day special. This was going to be a Christmas to remember. "I won't be long," Anna told the small, floppy-haired boys who looked to her now. "Be good." She had no choice but to leave her little brothers. They might not have much in the way of luxuries, but they had each other. "Keep that guard up to the fire," she told Michael, the more adventurous of the two, who nodded his head. "If you go near the fire, the catcher will come for you." Anna knew Michael was terrified of the bogeyman, who was rumoured to take wayward children from their families and were never seen again. She felt confident the warning would prevent her inquisitive young brothers doing anything dangerous. Taking one last look round the kitchen, she was satisfied to see the boys busying themselves making decorations, with the smell of a Christmas plum pudding steaming on the hob in readiness for tomorrow. Maybe it was not the fragrance of Ruby's beautiful pine Christmas tree, nor the fireplace bedecked with dark green holly and